There's a saying that a flu can be healed in 7 days. And if one doesn't heal the flu, it leaves in a week. So the flu is a serious infectious disease which suppress the instincts at the root. Do you know what is the most basic human pleasure? How is it experienced? This region here. When we were still on the lowest stages of development, the microbe, the amoeba, the greatest pleasure is to eat and to smell. Therefore, the roots of our pleasure are olfactory and taste-driven. During the flu, if there's a blocked nose for a long time, the sense of smell is removed, and later the sense of taste also disappears. In this way, the flu is a great medicine for cleansing the soul. When do people get the flu most often? In February. Why? It's the beginning of spring. God's love approaches. Love unfurls. The soul needs to be cleansed such that it can be prepared to receive love. The instincts need to be brought down. So the flu shows up. By the way, I got some questions here. People are experiencing a lot of trouble with their teeth. I'm thinking that by now you know why. Because the worshipping of pleasure in our current civilization leads to a lack of ability to experience pleasure. It doesn't just manifest as impotence and frigidity. It also manifests as problems with teeth. Here a woman writes, "Why can't I find a partner?" Because you're looking for a partner and not a friend. Often, women can't form families. Why? A family is created in order to bring children into the world and to bring them up together. If a woman implements a program destroying children, a subconscious desire not to have children, she's blocked from above from having a normal family. I've been struggling with an inflamed intestinal tract for 10 years. Any process of inflammation is a reaction to a lack of energy. If energy decreases a little bit, there's an infection. A major decrease in energy, inflammation. Even stronger decrease in energy stops the functioning entirely. If it decreases even more, a tumor. Therefore, if there's inflammation in the intestinal tract, that means there's a decrease in energy levels. This happens when a person implements a program of self-destruction. Why do kids often have stomach aches? Americans have noted 3,000 people were interviewed. If parents fight during pregnancy, then the resultant kids are prone to stomachache. Resentment, judgment, the parents' energy levels decrease. Therefore, the child is immediately affected. They're connected. And the fallout, stomachache. Therefore, a stomachache is the result of frequent disappointment in oneself or despondence, dissatisfaction with fate. The stomach can be affected if you hold resentment towards your parents, towards loved ones. The pain can manifest in 10, 15, 20 years. My name is such and such. I live in Barcelona. My chronic illness is connected to my bronchial tubes. The illness drags on for 13 years. I gave birth to 2 boys, even though I was told not to give birth. My question: a month ago, my lungs were bleeding. What does this indicate? I wrote in my books that we're all conceived as girls. And then with development, there's a further, higher stage of development, boys. If civilization weakens, energy falls, and more girls are born. Before wars, usually more boys are born. This has already been noted. Why? Because people sense impending war. On the subtle plane, we know our future. Our subconscious knows everything. So people know that war is coming, that there will be death. And their souls start to cleanse themselves. And boys are born. Because for a boy to be born, one must navigate this destruction of the future. Feminine energy is the material origin. Male energy is the spiritual origin. In order to give birth to boys, one must navigate the destruction of the spirit, the destruction of the future. One woman asked me, "My sister abuses me for no reason at all, poisons my life. She deals with me unfairly. Why?" I said, "You're going to have children." She said, "I'm already pregnant." I said, "Congratulations, but you're going to have a boy." She said, "Why?" I said, "Because you're experiencing the humiliation of your ideals, your pride, your sense of fairness, and this happens precisely before the birth of a boy." After half a year, she gave birth to a boy. I said, "Be happy. You're being cleansed." So this woman, on the inside, is very proud on the subconscious level. Therefore, the boys may be incapable of living, but they're already predestined to be hers. She overcame her fear and gave birth to 2 children, and this already counts in her favor. But she's yet to overcome her internal pride. First of all, not because of resentments towards the surrounding world and men, but because of resentment with herself. The bleeding in the lungs is an indication of her soul not yet being in order. That dissatisfaction with fate is a dangerous thing. That this is transferred to children, that this must be worked on. I want to say that the worst emotion a woman can experience is despondence. Judgment of her husband and father takes second place. Both can lead to infertility. Therefore, I tell many women, better to fight, scream, scratch him, but never hold resentment in your soul. A complaint must be allowed to be said. If you don't like a person, discipline him. There's a parable. A woman comes to a wise man, a healer, and says, "My mother-in-law is poisoning my life. I can't go on like this." And the wise man says, "What's the problem? Let's poison her." The woman says, "Great." He says, "Look here, poison. Every day, put a drop in her food." But it doesn't work immediately. It takes 3 months. And in order for your mother-in-law not to catch on, you must smile, take care of her, and compliment her. She says, "Good." 3 months later, she comes back to the healer and says, "What have I done? I've got a wonderful mother-in-law. She's a joy to be around. I don't want her to die. Give me an antidote." The healer said, "I played a joke on you. There was no poison. I just needed you to change the other person with your warmth, and you've done this." I just remembered how I once told a woman, "You are pregnant. Remove your judgment of your husband." Because I knew what this judgment would lead to, the serious illness of her child. She said, "But he is terribly behaved." I said, "Remove your judgment and resentment." She said, "I can't." I said, "But you're being cleansed via his behavior." And then I said, "After the child is born, he will be golden. He will be kind, attentive. He'll spoil you rotten. Just hold on for 2-3 months. Your child will be healthy." She said, "Okay, I'll forgive him." A year later, she said, "You cheated me. He didn't change at all after I gave birth." I said, "Yes, I fooled you. But now you have a healthy baby." Therefore, if you feel like you can't forgive, give yourself a timeline. 3 months of forgiveness now, none later. And when you'll get used to taking care of another, loving them and forgiving them, it'll be easier to continue the trend. My son is 22 years old and going bald. My daughter has problems with mental illness. She's been to a clinic for treatment. I'm proud, very easily offended, and am attached to material well-being. When a person cannot take pain on the level of the soul, then he implements a program of self-destruction, which can destroy not only the body, but consciousness as well, spirit. And that's the start of mental illness, hair loss, intestinal pain, etc., etc. Now I'll diagnose the woman on 3 dimensions. Usually I tell patients whether they can maintain love when the body is made humble, whether they can maintain their love when the spirit is made humble, and whether they can maintain their love when their soul is made humble, and everything becomes clear. So the ability to love when the body is made humble is high, plus 250. When the spirit is made humble, it's plus 100 and increasing. That's a very good result. The ability to love when the soul is made humble is 4 times worse than fatal. She's implementing a program of self-destruction that's 4 times worse than fatal on the level of the soul. That is, she absolutely cannot tolerate pain in her soul. In order for a woman to give birth to a healthy baby, she must undergo stages of humiliation of all 3 instincts: the body, the spirit, and the soul. The part of the soul which addresses this world must also be made humble. Then the part of the soul that addresses God blossoms and opens. It's most difficult to navigate soul pain. It only subsides when one understands that it's administered by God and must be accepted. If there's no sense of being part of God, of being love, then soul pain is impossible to overcome. It's curious that when people first started coming to me, I saw that their ability to accept and navigate traumatic situations was negligible. After reading some of the books I've written, people could maintain their love when their bodies and spirits were made humble, and I immediately took note of this. But in order to correctly navigate soul pain, it's necessary to listen to the seminars and read the latest books. Therefore, I'm trying to expedite the printing of my books in Czech, German, and Polish, because they contain not only my experience, but in the latest books, the experience of those who independently were able to surmount their illnesses and problems. But overall, the information that I give during the course of a seminar is enough if the person is sufficiently prepared. Therefore, the more you depend on yourself, on the feeling of love in your soul, the closer you are to health. Can a child who is hated and judged by his parents eventually become free? If the child doesn't judge or resent his parents, that is the definition of freedom. Why did people live in slave societies in the past? Do you know? Because one becomes a slave when one is a slave on the inside. Internal slavery always leads to external slavery. Earlier, a person would sell himself into slavery if he couldn't repay his debts. And he'd descend into debt when he'd worship his greed, his desires, his pleasures. A slave-owning society preaches an idol-worshipping religion. Christ said, "You are slaves of sin." So in order to stop being a slave on the outside, one must stop being a slave on the inside. One must stop being a slave of the animal When there's love in the soul, you become free on the inside because love is eternal and independent of anything. God, after all, doesn't depend on anything. Therefore, as current Western civilization squanders love, faith, and righteousness, we will inevitably backslide into idol worship and slave relationships. The parents who were harsh with you, you must pity and empathize with them. Nobody ever taught them to be loving. They're poor people. Any criminal can be pitied and empathized with. But he must be simultaneously punished, because punishing a criminal is helping his soul. What are your thoughts on the use of organs after clinical death? The worst thing is to choose the extreme path. One extreme is the categorical ban on the use of organs. The other extreme is when people decide that all problems will be solved by changing organs. We must understand that an organ stops working when the soul has accumulated aggression and love has left. Usually, cirrhosis of the liver occurs in alcoholics. But I understood that this is not exactly so. Cirrhosis of the liver happens in those who internally judge the whole world, others, and their own fates. Those people lose the love in their souls and they start suffering. And they try to quell this suffering with alcohol, narcotic pleasure. I was watching TV. They were showing a small child, about a year old, who needed a new liver. And it was clear that his parents were extremely judgmental of others, of each other, and that was the cause of the liver malfunction in the child. A liver transplant that costs about $200,000 can partially remove the problem. But if the hope lies only in organ transplants, only in physical salvation, the number of people with ill souls will grow. And unlike the body, on the level of the soul, we're all one. And when the limits of the soiling of the soul are reached, not on the level of the individual, but on the level of the whole civilization, the civilization must die to save the souls. I called my book Karma Diagnostics. Karma is an Eastern concept. According to Eastern beliefs, illness must not be treated. A person must suffer his karma. Diagnosis is a Western concept. The Western way is to treat any and everyone. I came to the conclusion that everyone should be treated, but using the correct treatment. First of all, the soul must be treated.